Imagine being a normal student at magic school, and one day a random classmate walks in and says, "Hey guys, your entire magic system is wrong." That guy is our protagonist, a genius so ridiculous that even teachers want a relationship with him.
Yeah,
Which is
boy.
strange because yesterday he was just the worst student in the academy. But before all the fame, chaos, and broken magic theories, Blair was just another struggling student. Or at least he was supposed to be, right now. Someone keeps calling Blair's name like it's a final warning before execution. "Wake up!" the teacher finally says, and the classroom explodes with laughter. Great, he's the morning entertainment. Blair opens his eyes slowly and asks, "Where am I?" Which honestly does not help his case. A girl pulls at his sleeve and whispers that Britney is about to call him again. He looks up and sees the teacher standing over him, arms crossed, patience officially expired. She asks if he has forgotten where he is. Blair, still trying to process reality, respectfully calls her his teacher. She responds by pulling his ear and announcing she cannot believe he is sleeping in class. Then she immediately points to math question 15 and tells him to solve it. The class settles in comfortably. This is about to be painful. Blair looks at the board, pauses, places a hand on his forehead like he's calculating the secrets of the universe. "I understand it," he says calmly. The teacher smirks and tells him he can answer it tomorrow as punishment. The room fills with confident laughter. They've already decided he's doomed. Unfortunately for them, Blair stands up with the relaxed confidence of someone who has corrected worse mistakes for a living. He walks to the board, writes the solution cleanly, and steps back like he just finished something mildly boring. Silence. The teacher stares. The students lean forward. The calculations are correct. Completely correct. Just seconds ago, they were laughing. Now they're trying to figure out where their own logic went. Blair simply asks if he can go to the bathroom, because after flipping the entire classroom's ego, a casual exit feels appropriate. She nods. As he walks through the hallway, he thinks the problem didn't even require anything advanced, just basic reasoning. In his previous life, Chen Lu was an ordinary math teacher who spent years building his career and was finally about to receive the title of senior professional. Then, during the most important exam of his life, he fell asleep. When he woke up, he was in another world. He quietly mutters that this is not scientifically acceptable and wonders how one nap turned into reincarnation. Looking around, he realizes he's now a student known for being bad at math in a world that treats math like gold. What surprises him most isn't waking up in another world. It's that the entire class treated that simple question like it required divine intervention. Blair still has no idea how he ended up in this world, but after observing the average intelligence level around him, he calmly concludes that reaching the top with mathematics might not even be difficult. If this world rewards logic, he may have already won. While walking, he suddenly collides with a girl with pink hair. They freeze in an awkward position that looks far worse than it actually is. Blair steps back immediately and asks if she's okay, apologizing quickly. The pink-haired girl narrows her eyes. "It's you again." That tone suggests a long criminal history. She angrily reminds him that he bumped into her during the entrance ceremony and embarrassed her in front of everyone. And she swore never to forget it. Now he has done it again. And this time, she claims, deliberately and vulgarly. Blair's face clearly says, "I just arrived in this universe. I promise this wasn't scheduled." Trying to survive, he suggests that maybe she bumped into him first. Not his best strategy. Her response? She starts making dramatic hand gestures like she's about to unlock a premium feature. She begins chanting something magical. Blair watches her with mild disbelief and jokingly copies her movements, because surely this is just theatrical overreaction. A glowing symbol forms in the air. Her hand ignites. Blair immediately stops joking. She declares she will deal with him personally. A fireball forms and heads straight for his face. She tells him to prepare for punishment. Blair makes the smartest decision available. He bows deeply and apologizes with maximum sincerity. Survival over dignity. The pink-haired girl clearly did not prepare for this outcome. She clenches her fist and warns him not to think it's over just because he apologized. However, by the time she finishes speaking, Blair is already halfway down the path. He runs like someone who values breathing. In his mind, nothing makes sense. Magic and science coexisting? That is not how reality is supposed to work. His head suddenly begins to ache, and before he can question existence further, he collapses. Memories flood in. He sees a younger version of himself crying, asking for his father. The general died honorably in battle. A box of condolences is handed over. People whisper that after the general's death, the once proud noble family became poor ex-nobles who now have to struggle to survive. He sees himself telling his mother he was accepted into college. She tells him to study hard. In her eyes, he looks just like his father. An old man urges him to hurry, warning that if he fails, he may not even have a place to sleep in the future. He promises he will return home. The truth settles in. The previous owner of this body worked extremely hard but never had talent for magic. He was constantly mocked by classmates. Hard work without talent. A difficult combination. Blair wakes up in the present as someone calls his name. A girl kneels beside him asking if he is okay. Her name is Jasmine. He wonders how she found him so quickly. Perhaps collapsing dramatically attracts attention. She offers her hand kindly to help him up. Blair thanks her, but inside he thinks the previous owner had a rough life. From now on, that changes. Later, in class, a ball teacher explains the 4 magical elements. He announces that the world is divided between ordinary people and those who can use magic, and their school is the most prestigious among them. Magic is divided into fire, water, earth, and air. Through specific gestures, a mage channels spiritual energy and turns it into power. Blair listens quietly. A world built on magic. A system based on talent. He adjusts slightly in his seat. Good. He already knows how to break systems. After class ends, the students practically celebrate their freedom like they just escaped a battlefield. Bags close. Chairs scrape. Noise level rises instantly. Meanwhile, Blair sits there a little quieter than the rest. The earlier words about talent are still echoing in his head. Before leaving, he calls out to the teacher. He turns and asks what dear Blair wants this time. He asks calmly whether a person without talent can still use magic. The teacher sighs in a way that suggests he has answered this exact question far too many times. He reminds him, with polite arrogance, that he has asked that before. Without talent, magic is impossible. End of discussion. People nearby overhear and begin mocking him again. Apparently, determination without talent is considered a comedy show. Just then, Toby arrives. In Blair's memories, Toby is his best and only friend, which says a lot about Toby's patience. Toby grins proudly, clearly having chased away the students who were bothering him. He casually says that even if Blair doesn't graduate, it's fine. He can always work on his father's estate. Very comforting. Blair waves goodbye as Toby leaves. Jasmine watches from a distance. When Blair notices and asks if she has something to say, she blushes, says no, and runs off, claiming that teacher Britney is calling him to the office. Blair watches her go and thinks it's strange how she always seems to appear, observe him, and disappear like she's collecting data. Walking alone, Blair mutters that it's ironic, absurd knowledge of mathematics, but no talent for magic. He attempts to reset a fireball spell, mostly out of stubborn curiosity. As expected, nothing happens. His face settles into disappointment. Then suddenly, something does happen. A faint reddish aura forms. Heat gathers in his palm. Fire appears and spirals around his arm. Blair freezes. That should not be possible. Magic without talent was just declared illegal by the system. He stares at the fire in disbelief, then casually starts playing with it. After all, it's not every day you wake up in another world. Maybe being a traveler comes with hidden features. Then reality returns. Teacher Britney is waiting. The sun is setting by the time Blair knocks on her office door. He calls out politely and enters, apologizing for being late. For some reason, he blushes slightly. The reason becomes obvious. Britney is standing in one of her oddly dramatic poses again. Blair's brain briefly forgets how to function. She smiles and tells him not to mind her unique posture choices. She asks him to sit. Then, without warning, she drops a massive stack of papers onto the table. Hundreds of calculations. She calmly says she prepared them for him and tells him not to rush. Blair glances down, answers one immediately. Out loud, she blinks, asks if that's correct. He calmly gives the solution. Her eyes widen. She rushes over to check. It's right, completely right. She admits that even she wouldn't have solved it that quickly. Blair sits there wondering how this escalated so fast. Brittany leans in slightly, curiosity sparkling in her eyes, and asks if he can explain how he solved it. Blair is momentarily defeated by the sheer force of teacher Brittany's cuteness. It's distracting, deeply distracting. In his mind, he calmly concludes that his teacher is acting more foolish than usual today. Regaining control, he lightly taps the table and explains that he simply followed the operations in order, but the problem and its wording were designed in a way that easily leads to errors. Brittany insists there is only one solution and only one correct method. Blair gently disagrees. He explains that for this problem, all you need to do is identify the pattern and sum the penultimate numbers until they reach 80. He points to the board and casually asks if she knows what the total of all those penultimate numbers should be. She raises her hand enthusiastically and answers 39. Blair nods and confirms it's correct, then politely asks her to sit down. He continues explaining that what looked like a long, exhausting addition problem could actually be turned into a simple multiplication if you notice the structure. With this method, similar problems become easy. Brittany blinks, then blinks again. She asks how such an efficient approach is even possible. She quickly adds that if you sum numbers over a constant period, the formula becomes even more general. At this point, her brain appears to leave the room temporarily. Blair gently brings her back by asking if everyone in this world struggles this much with patterns. She ignores that and instead asks if that really is the correct solution. Blair smiles and says it's just an easier way to calculate. And honestly, anyone could do it. Brittany suddenly grabs his hand and declares that he is a genius. If he continues studying, his future will be limitless. She is now radiating overwhelming enthusiasm. Blair takes a small step back. She apologizes for getting too excited. Then she asks if he wants to become a great mathematician. Blair answers immediately, no. He wants to become a great magician. Brittany looks personally offended by reality. She passionately insists that he has been given intelligence by the gods and should not waste it. As far as she knows, he has no talent for magic. And in her opinion, the answer to everything is mathematics. Blair gently pushes her hands away and calmly declares that no matter what, he will become a magician. In his mind, he reflects that if he started introducing advanced equations from his previous world, he could easily become a legendary mathematician here. But those would not truly be his achievements. Magic, on the other hand, is far more interesting than square roots and formulas. Brittany narrows her eyes and asks if he dares to make a bet. In a few days, there will be a magic test in class, and that test will determine his future. Blair already knows this conversation is heading toward prove yourself or accept math forever. Brittany calmly explains that if he truly wants to be a magician, he must pass the upcoming magic test. She even calls it a game. If he fails, she will personally make sure he stays at school as a mathematician. If he passes, she'll stop bothering him about it. In her mind, this is the safest bet in recorded history. A boy with zero talent passing a magic test? That's like asking a fish to solve algebra. Blair accepts anyway. He leaves thinking his teacher is dangerously persistent. She really believes this is unwinnable. That almost makes him want to pass out of spite. He turns the corner. And of course, the pink-haired fire hazard appears again. At this point, Blair is convinced Destiny is trolling him. They bump into each other. Again, this feels familiar, he mutters. She doesn't waste time. No greetings, no small talk. Straight to attempted elimination. She recites the fire spell, and a blazing fireball forms in her hand like she's practicing for a public execution. Blair, however, has already mastered the most powerful defensive spell in existence, Strategic Retreat. By the time she launches it, he's gone. Somewhere at a safe distance, he calmly reflects that if he had stayed, he would now be a historical event. Later, Isabel storms into Brittany's office looking personally offended by oxygen. Brittany asks why she seems upset. Isabel announces she encountered a pervert at school and promises next time she will burn him alive. Very reasonable escalation. She then throws her completed math work on the table and proudly declares she finished it in half an hour. Brittany nods approvingly and casually adds that Blair solved it in 1 minute. 1 minute. Isabel's brain pauses. She asks who this boy is. Brittany explains that he used a solution she had never seen before. Isabel's anger immediately transforms into curiosity. A faster method? A smarter approach? Suddenly, the pervert sounds more like intellectual challenge. She demands an introduction. Moments later, she kicks open the classroom door like she owns the building and asks who Blair is. The room goes silent instantly. Toby senses danger. Someone violently pinches him from under the desk. It's Blair, who has decided that furniture is safer than visibility. Toby calmly lies and says Blair already left. Isabel narrows her eyes but eventually leaves, announcing that when Blair returns, he should be informed she wants to talk. The door slams. Blair slowly emerges from under the desk like someone respawning after defeat. The class is staring. Toby asks what Blair did. Blair genuinely has no idea. Toby informs him that Isabel has many followers at the academy. If they think he offended her, things will escalate quickly. Blair calmly says the academy has rules. They can't just attack people. Toby stares at him and asks if he understands where they are. Blair gives a vague answer about Apollo. Toby corrects him. Isabel's father is the Lord of Apollo City. Oh, that Apollo. Blair immediately asks if it's still possible to apologize retroactively. In the background, someone loudly accuses him of touching Lady Isabel. A bully steps forward and announces he doesn't need to do anything. Blair will fail the magic test and get expelled anyway. Toby notices the bully is clearly fishing for a fight. The bully explains that while grades keep you enrolled, after graduation only magic users stay. All second-year students must pass the magic test. Fail, and you're gone immediately. For most students, it's easy. A formality. But Blair? He has no talent. Blair finally connects the dots. Now he understands why Britney chose this test. It wasn't a game. It was what she thought was a guaranteed victory. The bully suddenly slams his hand on the table just to make sure everyone remembers he exists. He asks Blair if he didn't hear what was just said, and then casually calls him a bastard orphan. That gets Toby on his feet immediately. Toby may be round, but he rises like a loyal bodyguard. He asks if the bully wants to fight. The bully scoffs and says it's none of his business. Toby calmly replies that Blair is his friend, so it is absolutely his business. The bully gets annoyed and says he'll remember this. Of course he will. He leaves with the classic, "I'll settle this later" line, which never sounds as cool as people think. Blair watches the whole thing and quietly admits that while Toby may not look reliable, he is surprisingly loyal when it matters. Then Blair asks, just to test him, if Toby would still defend him if Isabel came to bother him. Toby answers honestly that if Isabel asked him to hit Blair, he would do it immediately. Blair's confidence drops a little. Loyalty apparently has conditions. Soon, the day of the magic test arrives. The teacher explains that everyone will perform a basic fireball spell. It's simple. Most students should pass easily. In addition to reciting the spell, they must hit the target. That's it. Basic magic. The bully is called first. He dramatically recites the spell, forms a solid fireball, and throws it at the target. It hits cleanly. 8 points. He turns to Blair in the crowd and tells him to enjoy his last moments at the academy. Toby tells him to shut up. The next student is Toby himself. He recites the spell just like the bully. A small fireball appears. Very small. Toby struggles to hold it together like it might disappear at any second. He throws it. The fireball barely reaches the target, more like a polite spark than an attack. The teacher pauses, considers it, and says it counts. Toby celebrates like he just conquered a dragon. A pass is a pass. Then the teacher looks at Blair's document. He already knows what it says. No talent. He sighs and mutters that Blair is a little fool. He's about to announce that everyone has passed when the bully interrupts loudly. He reminds the teacher that one person hasn't taken the test yet, student Blair. The room shifts its attention. Blair remains silent. The teacher asks calmly if Blair will take the test. At that moment, laughter spreads across the classroom. Some students openly say, it's impossible. He can't even handle the basics. Someone calls him Blair the magical idiot. The nickname spreads quickly. It's amazing how creative people become when they feel safe in a crowd. Blair stands there quietly. The entire room has already decided the outcome, which honestly makes this much more interesting. Toby steps closer and quietly says it is obvious they planned this whole thing. Yet, against all logic, Blair calmly announces that he will take the test. No one understands why. But the class does understand one thing. This is free entertainment, so they mock him with full energy. Brittany says he still does not realize he is a magical waste. The teacher immediately tells everyone to be quiet and asks again if the boy will take the test. And Blair confidently says yes, and even adds that he can start now, which makes people wonder if he is brave or simply tired of living. He stands in front of the target knowing very well he can use magic without reciting, but he pretends anyway, dramatically chanting the spell and commanding the fireball to appear. Everyone covers their eyes expecting chaos, flames, maybe even an explosion. Nothing appears. Not a spark, not smoke, just silence. 2 seconds later, the laughter begins, loud and merciless, students pointing and mocking him. But that turns out to be a small mistake, because Blair's fury decides to wake up. Suddenly, a massive fire erupts, huge, blazing, absolutely visible, and the target is not just hit. It is completely destroyed, reduced to ashes that spread over the grass like dramatic confetti. The same students who were laughing now look terrified. The bully says that is impossible. Toby jumps around saying he knew his friend was amazing. And Brittany feels strangely sad because now she knows Blair has real talent. The teacher calmly announces that Blair has passed and asks him to come along, while in her mind, Brittany keeps wondering how he did that. Blair gives a simple lie to avoid suspicion. He practiced every day, and suddenly it worked. The teacher explains that magic is given by the gods, that those who cannot manifest it are called forsaken, that lacking talent is extremely rare, and that someone who once had none but now has power is almost like a joke. Yet he adds that Blair has great potential and could even reach the level of a Saint Mage, the highest level possible. Blair learns that Saint Mages can supposedly tear the fabric of space and time, travel between worlds and dimensions. Most people call it nonsense, but Blair does not, because he clearly remembers ending up in this world somehow. Unfortunately, his teacher does not believe in spatial magic, so no helpful answers there. The academy then takes a few days off after the test, and Blair uses the time wisely by studying magic books like a man preparing for final exams and world domination at the same time. He discovers there are 7 levels of mages with Saint Mage at the pinnacle, and that their powerful magic is only described in books. The current world basks at such stories, but Blair quietly suspects there is truth in them. One day, the administrator asks if he is still reading. Blair confidently says he will continue, and that night he stays up studying until sleep officially gives up on him. The next morning, he opens the classroom door to find a crowd already gossiping about him. His magic was great and powerful. He was hiding his strength, and according to several girls, if you look carefully, he is actually quite handsome. Yesterday, he was a waste. Today, he is mysterious magic. Truly changes opinions fast. In front of him sits Isabel in a very suspicious position. Blair covers his eyes dramatically and says he cannot see. She says it is unexpected that he is the person Britney talked about. He tries to explain that it is a misunderstanding, but she yells, "Pervert!" and her fury literally turns into magic as she begins reciting a fireball spell. Blair prepares himself, tries to defend somehow, braces for impact, and then realizes nothing hit him at all. Luckily, the teacher arrives exactly on time because Isabel was about half a second away from turning Blair into a human barbecue, and with one calm sentence he stops the incoming disaster. Brittany immediately declares that using magic inside the classroom is forbidden unless a superior permits it. Isabel tries to defend herself, but Brittany shuts her down so fast it feels like she muted her in real life, and the teacher casually announces that he was looking for Blair and they should come to his office. Oh, and Isabel too. Blair feels oddly proud. Being called to the office usually means punishment, but today it feels like he unlocked a secret achievement. The 3 of them leave. The door closes dramatically, and the bully is left outside staring at the empty space, asking what just happened, as if the plot just skipped a page. Inside the office, Blair apologizes sincerely and explains that everything was a misunderstanding, because apparently almost burning classmates now counts as misunderstanding. Brittany says he was careless and asks Isabel not to be bothered. Isabel, still powered by pride, accepts the apology in the most royal way possible, like she is forgiving a peasant. Then the teacher drops something unexpected. Blair's magical power is beyond his understanding, and as promised, he will not persuade him anymore. But curiosity wins, and he asks how Blair did it and whether he could teach him. Imagine being so strong that your teacher asks you for lessons. Blair, professional liar level 1, says, "It just happened," which is the magical version of "I don't know, bro." And then he casually asks if gestures and reciting spells are really necessary to use magic. Isabel almost explodes again, calling the question stupid because even children know the answer. But Blair keeps going and asks if all mages are the same. Britney explains patiently that no matter the level, every mage must use gestures and recite spells. Only the gods can skip the procedure. Isabel adds that the teacher does not need to answer such ridiculous questions so seriously, while Blair quietly realizes something terrifying and exciting. He does not need gestures. He does not need reciting. He might be built different, possibly because he is not even from this world. Britney continues saying this is basic common sense, and that if Blair wants to be a great mage, he must memorize theory books. But that is not why he was called here. The teacher then reveals a paper in his hand, and Blair stares at it like it is ancient alien technology, because he has no idea what it is. Isabel, clearly enjoying this educational moment, informs him that it is a journal, the place where the most important academic works in the entire kingdom are published. Basically, the kingdom's version of, if it's not in here, it doesn't matter. And Blair? He just stands there thinking he came to apologize and somehow ended up in advanced magic politics. Suddenly, Isabel freezes, staring at something in the journal like she just saw a ghost, because right there, printed clearly, are her teacher's name and Blair's name. Britney calmly explains that she submitted the formulas she learned from Blair, while Blair himself does not look impressed at all, since he works in the library for 2 silver coins a month and, as far as he knows, paper cannot be eaten. Just when he is emotionally prepared to walk away, the teacher says he almost forgot something and hands him a bag full of coins as a bonus for the manuscript. Blair opens it, sees more than 50 silver coins inside, and instantly experiences what rich people call happiness. In one day, he earns more than he does in a month, and for a brief moment his teacher looks less like a teacher and more like a financial miracle. Then Britney, with the innocence of a smiling villain, says she will take half since she also contributed. Just like that, the 50 becomes 25. And in Blair's mind, she transforms into the most elegant snake he has ever met. But even 25 silver coins is still enough to make him forgive reality. However, Blair's brain is now working at full speed. He looks at his teacher and casually asks if every published work receives a bonus of 50 coins. The teacher admits he has not paid much attention, but says it might be normal since the journal is very famous. And at that moment, Blair unlocks a new life goal: academic capitalism. He calmly says he has been thinking lately and proposes solving formulas in a unified way. Britney's eyes widen because she can feel another world-changing moment approaching and wonders if this could relate to the mystery of Ross. Blair has absolutely no idea who Ross is, so the teacher explains that Ross is a great mathematician who posed the famous problem involving 7 cats, 7 wives, and 7 bags, because apparently mathematicians enjoy confusing everyone. Britney quickly does the math while explaining the problem, and Blair casually says the solution is easy, but can be simplified beautifully using a unified formula. Hearing this, Britney looks thrilled that such a legendary mathematical problem might be solved so simply, while Blair, inside his head, admits he still only has some early ideas, but confidence is free, so why not? The teacher immediately pulls him into further calculations, and time passes quickly as the two dive deep into math like scholars chasing glory. Meanwhile, Isabel, who did not sign up for advanced mathematical romance, slowly falls asleep in the corner until a sudden noise snaps her awake, reminding her that peace is never permanent around Blair. Isabel wakes up to her teacher shouting that this is incredible, as if the world has just been saved by algebra, and Britney proudly announces that the protagonist has great talent for mathematics. Isabel walks closer, clearly offended that a boy she called useless yesterday is now solving legendary problems, and asks if all of this truly came from his own head. Blair becomes serious and asks if she really wants to know, which only makes her blush because he always talks like he is about to reveal a forbidden truth. She quickly says he cannot keep lying, and Blair calmly replies that he simply studies math while others are sleeping, a sentence that lands like a quiet insult. Isabel, now embarrassed, demands to know what he means, because suddenly sleep feels like a crime. The next day, she finds herself thinking about Blair, which is unfortunate but unavoidable, and then sees him acting suspiciously near the second-year building. Since he is only a first-year student, she immediately assumes he might harass the seniors because clearly he wakes up every morning planning chaos. Determined to expose him, she follows him, but Blair disappears so smoothly that she's left questioning her eyesight. In reality, he is standing before the large wall Toby once mentioned between the second and third-year buildings, and instead of using the gate like a normal human, he performs several flips over it, because subtlety has never been his strength. Remembering his teacher's advice about finding a high-level mage in the city, Blair steps outside the academy and into a bustling place full of movement, money, and people who probably do not argue about fireballs every morning. He observes that the city is prosperous and then stops before the huge and majestic Magic Association building, which looks expensive even from a distance. He takes a mask from his pocket and puts it on, deciding it is better not to reveal his identity, because nothing says, "I am trustworthy," like hiding your face. Inside, the place is crowded. The receptionist is Jasmine, his friend, but she does not recognize him because of the mask. She politely asks if he wants to hire a magic consultant, and Blair says yes while thinking she must be working part-time. Then she explains that consultant fees range from 15 gold coins to 200. Blair almost stops breathing. 1 gold coin equals 100 silver coins, and he survives on silver coins, like a desert traveler survives on drops of water. He immediately apologizes and tries to escape before his poverty becomes public knowledge. But Jasmine runs after him and gently suggests that if money is the problem, he can apply for a library loan card. Blair freezes, surprised that knowledge might be cheaper than pride, and she explains that the institution has a large library. It may not replace a high-level instructor, but it is certainly better than standing outside a grand building in a mask pretending to be important. Blair confidently says he will make the card, and Jasmine immediately asks for his credentials, which hits him like a silent thunderbolt because he does not even know his own official name in this world, let alone where any important documents might be. Jasmine says she thought he was already a mage, but he can either borrow credentials or take the certification test, which is easier since he only needs to cast a spell of the element corresponding to the mage who certifies him. Blair asks if he can do the certification here, and she says yes, but strongly advises against doing it today because the certifier is very strict. Ignoring logic completely, Blair says he will do it today. 2 men appear, and Jasmine announces that Blair wants certification. They sit down, and the bald man immediately questions why Blair is wearing a mask. Thinking fast, Blair lies that he burned his face while practicing the fireball spell. The old man calmly notes that burning yourself with a basic spell is not common, while the bald man arrogantly declares that Blair will only become a junior mage in his next life. Jasmine suggests moving to the testing area, but the bald man refuses, saying there is no need and that Blair can simply attack him with fire magic. Blair freezes because he knows exactly how strong his fire can be, but the old man asks mockingly if he really thinks his little fireball can hurt Andre. Not wanting to argue further, Blair begins gathering mana. Fire spreads through the room, and Ander casually tells the old man that this year, there is no one decent unfortunately. The spell is not finished. Blair keeps gathering more mana. The air grows heavy. Everyone slowly realizes this is no longer a demonstration, but a possible disaster. Still, the bald man told him to attack. So Blair obeys. A gigantic sphere of fire forms, more like a small sun than a spell, and it moves toward Andre. His only reaction is to stand there in terrible silence, staring at what looks very much like his final moment. The explosion blinds everyone. A beam of light fills the room. Smoke rises, and Jasmine coughs while trying to see what is left of the building. When the smoke clears, the old man is standing. Because at the last second, he sensed the danger and raised a barrier strong enough to stop the fireball, saving Andre from becoming a public barbecue. Andre, however, has no dignity left. He remains on the ground, his face frozen in pure terror, which is the polite version of hopelessness. Jasmine is stunned by the destructive power, and Blair apologizes sincerely, saying he thought they were prepared so he used just a bit more force. After this unforgettable demonstration of a bit more force, Jasmine immediately hands him the certification and the library card. Blair is thrilled because he can finally study properly, while Jasmine, still recovering mentally, says she has never seen anything like that and is sure he will become a great mage in the future. He thanks her. She says she will wait for him next time, and then Jasmine pauses, suddenly realizing something deeply unsettling. How did this masked boy know her name? In the library, Blair expected silence and dust, not a full army of people reading like their lives depended on it. Every table is occupied, every chair is taken. Apparently, knowledge is fashionable here. He mutters that this is strange, especially since Jasmine said the books here are more advanced and in-depth, particularly the section about magical spiritual power. The books explain that spiritual power defines a mage's strength, along with elemental affinity, and that high-level mages have an immeasurable advantage over weaker ones, which is a polite academic way of saying, the strong stay strong. Then Blair reads about the theory of the four elements: fire, water, wind, earth, the foundation of magic and the entire world. Everything else is just a derivative, like primary colors. Blair stares at the page. With the level of mathematics this world has, calling this complete theory is generous. Magic here has no scientific explanation. None. It simply exists and everyone accepts it. Blair does not. And that is when his brain does something dangerous. He suddenly stands up from his chair with a huge smile, scaring at least 3 innocent readers. If this works, he can create new magic. Not learn it, create it. He grabs his library card like it is a legendary artifact and runs out, declaring to the air that he will return to the academy and test his discovery. Somewhere else, Jasmine, the old man, and Andre are drinking coffee like nothing in the world is about to explode. The bald man continues insulting Blair, but admits the fireball was immeasurable. The old man strokes his beard and says something was strange. He had no control over the boy's magic. It felt different, like it did not belong to this reality. Night falls. Blair casually jumps over the academy wall again, because walking through gates is for ordinary students. Landing on the grass, he confirms no one is around and decides this is the perfect time for experimental disaster. Calmly, he closes his eyes and breathes in, feeling the energy of the environment, and then he senses it. He can control the flow. He decides to find the second most abundant element in the atmosphere, oxygen. He gathers it into his palm. He is not sure if it is perfectly pure omikos, but it feels close enough to be dangerous. He mixes fire with oxygen. The spark ignites. It works. It is real. Then it goes out. Silence. Disappointment. Blair refuses to accept defeat. He tries again, this time controlling both elements together. Suddenly, lightning and wind start reacting. The air becomes violent. Blair stands in the middle of a growing vortex of fire and oxygen, like a man who has definitely made a mistake, but refuses to admit it. The entire academy begins trembling. Walls crack, windows shake. His teacher feels the tremor and looks out the window, only to see what appears to be a massive explosion. Almost the entire forest catches fire. The good news, Blair is alive. The bad news, the magic is still surrounding him like it wants round two. Fortunately, he manages to stop it just in time. Thick fog covers the area, and when it clears, the ground is completely shattered and burned. Apparently, the oxygen was much purer than he expected. People start running toward the scene, shouting that this was not supposed to cause such chaos. Meanwhile, Blair is sprinting through the forest, slightly panicked but also slightly proud, muttering that yes, the explosion might have been big, but it created something significantly larger. The next day in class, Blair is studying. In reality, he is asleep with his face on the desk because last night he almost destroyed the academy, and apparently that is tiring. A hand slowly lands on his shoulder. Toby, looking serious, which is already suspicious. He asks if Blair knows what happened last night. Blair lies instantly and says he was sleeping peacefully. Toby explains there was a massive explosion. The school is under investigation, and based on the crater size, it had to be at least a high-level mage. Then Toby begins analyzing suspects like a low-budget detective and confidently says, Teacher Britney is a high-level mage. For absolutely no suspicious reason, Blair becomes very alert. He immediately goes to Britney's office and knocks. She opens the door smiling, saying she needed him, holding a paper like it is national treasure. The Mathematical Society has posted the solution to Ross's problem, and since Blair solved it, his name is listed as the author. She congratulates him for solving one of the greatest mathematical problems. Blair interrupts the celebration and loudly announces that there are more important matters. He wants to study mathematics with her. Britney blinks. Yesterday, he wanted to be a great mage. Today, he wants to be a mathematician. Blair calmly says he will be both, because clearly ordinary limits do not apply to him. Suddenly, she grabs his arm and says she is happy he thinks that way. Blair's brain prepares for emotional damage. Instead, she tells him to come every night to study math. Every night. The boy is so emotional he looks like he might ascend. Britney says with his talent, he will become a great mathematician. Blair steps back and casually adds that he also has a small magic question. She agrees to answer his questions anytime. He opens the door to leave. She reminds him to come tomorrow night. He is about to close the door when she tells him to wait. Silence. Tension. Blair slowly turns around, already planning excuses. She stares at him and asks if he is taking advantage of her to get answers to magic questions. He starts sweating like a criminal caught mid-confession. Flowers practically appear around him as he gives a half-truth. He just wants to spend more time with her. She walks closer. He mentally prepares for execution. Instead, in the softest voice possible, she tells him to be careful when leaving and not to forget to come at night after class. Blair walks out feeling like he survived something extremely dangerous. Deep in his subconscious, he still cannot decide if she is incredibly intelligent or dangerously kind. The next night, Blair confidently opens the office door only to freeze. Britney is sitting there. Isabel is sitting there. And Isabel is looking at him like he just walked into a trap. She immediately asks what he is doing there, and Britney apologizes, saying she forgot to mention that starting today Blair will be studying with them. Since Isabel is his senior, she must take care of him and help when needed. Isabel's face suggests she did not apply for this responsibility. Britney then asks Blair to sit next to Isabel because she has a question for him. If a large stone is thrown into a well, followed by another stone with double the mass, which one reaches the bottom first? Isabel confidently says she just needs to calculate the time, but Blair calmly explains that the larger stone will never catch up to the smaller one, ignoring air resistance. They will fall at the same rate, and the smaller one will arrive first if released first. Isabel's patience immediately expires. She says he has knowledge but lacks common sense. Britney admits she does not fully understand Blair's explanation, and says the wise sages have always stated that the heavier object falls first. Isabel adds that even a child knows this. Blair gets slightly annoyed and asks whether anyone has actually confirmed this. Isabel says they cannot doubt the great sages. Britney watches the argument like someone observing a very educational disaster. Blair says directly that for something to be true, it must be proven. Isabel immediately asks if he wants to bet. Britney tells them to stop. Isabel raises the stakes, 10 gold coins. Blair's eyes light up so fast it should count as magic. The three go outside the academy to an open field. Holding the stones, Britney gently asks Blair to reconsider because 10 gold coins is not a small amount. Blair, without regret, tells her to continue. Isabel confidently declares this will be the easiest victory of her life. Britney calmly warns that confidence is good, but arrogance has consequences. A strong wind blows dramatically because the universe loves timing. Britney begins to float into the air and Blair looks impressed. Isabel mocks him, calling him a commoner for finding levitation exciting. Britney reaches a proper height and prepares to drop the stones. Isabel continues, predicting Blair's defeat with full confidence. The stones are released. They fall. For a brief moment they appear equal. Then they land almost simultaneously. Silence. Isabel stares at the ground like reality has betrayed her personally. Blair already knows he has won. Britney descends smoothly, landing like a professional, and checks the result. Isabel shouts that this is impossible. Britney looks genuinely shocked and asks how Blair knew. He casually says he read it in a book. And just like that, thousands of years of common sense collapse because a first-year student decided to test it instead of worship it. This was not luck. This was knowledge with good timing and 10 gold coins. Britney looks at the stones, looks at the sky, looks back at Blair, and calmly announces that the law of falling objects has officially changed. Just like that, centuries of wisdom deleted in one afternoon, while Blair stands there unimpressed because in his world this was something people tested for fun. She repeats that he is a genius. Isabel, standing beside him, is vibrating with rage so intensely that if anger were an element, she would qualify as a high-level mage. Trying to regain control of the situation, she asks him to update the law properly with her help. Blair agrees. Instantly, her brain abandons logic and enters fantasy mode. Newspapers everywhere. Headlines screaming, "Two young geniuses revolutionize science." Scholars fainting dramatically. Her reputation exploding, invitations arriving from everywhere. And then, naturally, marriage. Blair Isabel. Her face turns red from thoughts that escalated at irresponsible speed. Regaining elegance, she tells him that if he ever gets into trouble, she will solve everything. Blair extends his hand. Her mind short-circuits completely. She softly asks why. He calmly says he wants the bet money. Romance evaporates. Reality returns. Isabel runs away, shouting that he needs to fix his brain. Hours later, she delivers the 10 gold coins anyway, and Blair internally celebrates becoming wealthier by simply letting gravity do its job. When she confronts him again, she accuses him of not caring about fame or honor, but clearly loving money. Blair stares at the beautiful blue sky, leaves dancing in the wind, remembering his fake past life of endless work and peaceful teaching. Then calmly says he only wants money to improve his life, nothing dramatic, nothing heroic. He leaves. Britney and Isabel watch him walk away like he is some mysterious legend instead of a very practical man with 10 gold coins. The next day, Blair is nearly asleep at his desk, but smiling because financial security is powerful medicine. Suddenly, the bully appears, calls him trash, and says a senior wants him. Blair barely processes the insult until the bully grabs his collar and tells him to lower his head because casting a fireball means nothing. A new voice slices through the air, ordering the bully to let go. Enter Senior Faye Average Face, maximum authority, 2 bodyguards for decorative intimidation. Blair has no idea who he is and looks unimpressed. Faye tells him to stay away from Isabel because someone like him should not even speak casually to her. Then he leaves dramatically. On the way out, he bumps into Toby and does not apologize. Toby collapses like he just collided with aristocracy. He later whispers that Faye is the son of a great viscount and the youngest heir of a powerful family. Offend him, and life becomes difficult. He even warns Blair not to chase Isabel's beauty. Blair remains emotionally unavailable to this advice. Later, under the bright sun, Blair sits thinking about his pure oxygen ball, the experimental spell that nearly redesigned the forest. It still needs time to charge, which is inconvenient for immediate chaos. His biggest advantage remains that he does not need gestures or recitation, which in this world is basically cheating. He wonders if he can combine multiple elements at once, a thought that history suggests will not end peacefully. Isabel interrupts, reminding him to study Britney's assignment. She hands him the paper. Blair yawns and reveals he already solved everything. Isabel's brain struggles to keep up. Calmly, he explains that he simply looks for more efficient paths to each solution, the most ingenious route. She listens carefully, absorbing every word, slowly realizing that standing next to him feels less like studying and more like standing next to a natural disaster that also happens to be good at math. Blair suddenly stands up and casually asks Isabel how many fireballs she can summon at once. She answers proudly, 9. Blair's face immediately says, "That's it," which offends her more than any insult. Teasing him, she says she knows he can only launch one at a time. Blair calmly replies that he never saw anything in the books about summoning multiple spells simultaneously. Isabel explains that books teach basic theory, not advanced magic, and casually mentions she learned it because her father hired a consultant. Wealth advantage activated. Then, with a smug smile, she adds that if someone were willing to call her big sister, maybe she could teach him. Without hesitation, zero delay, Blair calls her big sister. The response is so fast, even Isabel freezes. She recovers by calling him a thick-skinned pervert, stands up dramatically, and tells him to follow her outside because she will show him how it's done. In a small field, she casts the spell. 9 fireballs appear, floating beautifully and perfectly stable. Blair is genuinely impressed. Isabel explains that most mages believe they must keep magical spirit fixed in one place, but with enough skill and experience, you can summon and manipulate them freely. With proper concentration, you can even launch them all at one target at once. Blair then asks if it is possible to control them differently at the same time. Isabel says that would be like drawing a circle with one hand and a square with the other. They laugh together. Meanwhile, somewhere nearby, Senior Faye is watching and has already decided they are dating. Filled with rage, he crushes part of a wall with his hand, because clearly masonry is responsible for his emotions. He mutters that Blair will pay for ignoring his warning. Back in the field, Blair begins training, attempting to divide his mind into 9 independent parts. Isabel tells him to take it slowly, that it took her 6 months to master this, and it is perfectly fine if he fails. The fireball in Blair's hand suddenly shines, sparks fly, and in the next second, multiple fireballs appear. Isabel screams, asking how he did that. Blair calmly raises his hand and says he simply followed her method. Isabel is offended for reasons she cannot explain. In her mind, she realizes Pervert is not only a genius in mathematics, but also terrifyingly talented in magic. A boy once called abandoned by the gods is now acting like their favorite child. Overwhelmed, she shouts that he took too long and runs away, telling him not to ask her for help again. Blair stands there confused, holding his face, wondering what exactly he did wrong, and concluding that understanding women is more complicated than elemental fusion. Then he feels something in his pocket. Meanwhile, Isabel is still running, calling him a pervert at full volume. Suddenly, Blair grabs her hand. She freezes, completely alert, demanding to know why he is pulling her. In his palm is a small teddy bear bracelet. Simple, cute. Blair, unusually polite, calls her his dear Isabel and says he only managed to learn thanks to her careful training. He asks her to accept the gift from her little brother. Her eyes shine when she sees it. The bracelet is adorable. She blushes deeply. In her mind, she admits this pervert has good moments. Quickly, she grabs it, calls it ugly, and runs away, only to trip and fall awkwardly. She stands up again, looks back with uncertainty and something softer in her eyes, then continues running while declaring she will never forgive him. Blair watches her go, completely lost in thought, and mutters that the bracelet cost 50 silver coins. He originally bought it for his teacher but changed his mind. Truly, destiny is unpredictable. Suddenly, Blair notices something in the tall grass bay's henchman. Baldy steps forward like he finally found courage on discount, and reminds Blair that the senior warned him to stay away from Isabel, yet he continued meeting her anyway. Blair calmly stands up, looks around, and realizes he is surrounded. At this point, survival instinct activates. Better to run than stay and become an example. He dashes. The fools chase him, shouting for him to stop, as if criminals politely freeze when asked. In his subconscious, Blair notes that this entire group is a long-term problem. Then the bully screams that Blair is like his father running from the battlefield and still getting killed. That sentence lands. Blair stops. Slowly. The bully smirks and asks if he hit a sore spot, then charges forward. His punch is about to land until his hand suddenly burns, nearly turning to ashes. Fire spreads. Multiple fireballs appear around Blair. The bully collapses, screaming, badly injured. Blair's voice turns cold. He says his father died fighting for this country not as a coward, but as a hero. Then he tells the bully never to insult him again. The henchmen stare at the 9 fireballs floating in the air and immediately decide loyalty has limits. They run, abandoning their companion like disposable furniture. Blair stands over the bully like a final boss. The bully panics and reminds him that the academy forbids student fights. Blair glares and says he should have remembered that earlier. He prepares to move again, but suddenly people appear behind him. The bully screams for help, convinced he is about to die. Then he looks ahead and sees Blair collapse, completely. The bully pokes him to confirm he is not dead, and then runs like a professional coward. Britney's voice cuts through the chaos, ordering him to stop. The bully cries that he did nothing, and that Blair simply fell on his own. Affectionately, Britney lifts Blair, and in his fading consciousness he sees bright red skies like he is entering paradise early. The bully begs her to listen, but another voice interrupts, asking if he truly believes they are blind and did not see Blair collapse at his feet. Britney orders the bully to her office. Nearby, someone apologizes to Vice President Calvin for the disturbance, but Calvin calmly says such incidents cannot happen again. Meanwhile, in Britney's arms, Blair's heartbeat stops. For a moment, his soul tries to leave his body, but something pulls it back. Britney asks if he is okay and hugs him tightly, clearly shaken. A new voice interrupts again, saying explanations can wait. First, something must be handled. Britney introduces the men they are from the Mathematical Society. Blair, still weak but polite, bows to President Dean and Vice President Calvin. Dean praises Blair as a genius for solving the Ross mystery. Britney immediately corrects him, saying the solution was entirely Blair's and she only helped write it. The men question this. They say if she claims the achievement, she will receive awards, funding, and full support from the society, and the Academy will benefit greatly. Money is not an issue. Britney asks what happens to Blair. Dean sighs and says the boy is very young. It is difficult to believe he solves such a great mystery. Blair quietly takes her hand and asks her to accept. Britney hesitates. Dean gives them time to consider the offer and leaves with Calvin. Sunset covers the academy in silence. As they walk down the corridor, Britney softly says that solving Ross's mystery may not change development, but it is important for history, and the honor belongs to Blair. No one else should take it. Blair's face turns melancholic as he tells Britney that the honor does not belong to him anyway, and besides, she is not too old to accept something grand. The compliment lands. Her face brightens instantly. Then Blair realizes he may have just called her old by accident. Again. The next day, students gather around the board full of academic publications, whispering that once again Blair and Miss Britney have published a new article, this time solving the Ross mystery that scholars failed to solve for years. Of course, everyone says it must have been teacher Britney who solved it, because Blair is insignificant. Blair hears everything and ignores it. He only thinks about the work he sent to his teacher. He sighs. There's nothing else he can do. Suddenly, loud shouting echoes through the academy. An adult man is yelling that someone is trash and only knows how to fight it is the bully's father. He says he did not send his son to school to fight, then loses control and starts beating him in public. The hits sound painful. After venting his frustration, the man apologizes desperately and begs President Dean not to expel his son. Dean says the boy's behavior has been unacceptable. The father drops to his knees begging. The bully, humiliated, tells his father not to embarrass himself. At that moment, Blair steps forward and greets President Dean politely. The bully sees him and grits his teeth. Dean states clearly that the academy plans to expel the bully for violence and breaking rules. The father, now trembling, kneels in front of Blair and begs him to, saying that if his son is expelled, his life will be over. Blair looks uncomfortable. He sighs softly. Despite everything, he asks Dean not to punish the bully so severely, saying they only had small conflicts. Silence falls. Dean studies the father, then says that because of Blair's request, the expulsion will be temporarily withdrawn. But if it happens again, there will be no second chance. The father bows repeatedly, promising it will never happen again. The bully thanks Dean. He also thanks Blair, though it sounds heavy. Later, before entering class, the bully quietly asks Blair why he helped him. Blair answers seriously that he should never treat his father that way again. The bully thanks him again, then warns that Fe will not let this go, especially since Fe's uncle is the vice president of the academy. Political storm confirmed. That evening, Blair is exhausted and still must go to work, but his employer is waiting with an unusual expression. The old man asks if Blair has offended someone recently. Blair immediately feels uneasy. Something is wrong. Without much explanation, the old man says he is fired and cannot continue living there. It is an order from the vice president after the recent incident. Just like that, stability disappears. Later, Britney tells Blair that she plans to take him and Isabel on an exchange trip and asks if he will be busy tomorrow. Blair apologizes quietly and says he must find a new place to stay. Since Blair was expelled from the library with the efficiency of a political cleanup, Britney calmly announces that he can stay at her house because she has a spare room and lives alone. Alone. Blair's imagination immediately starts misbehaving. So he shuts it down like a responsible adult and says it might not be convenient. Britney counters with the ultimate academic temptation: unlimited math questions at any time. That is unfair. Slightly embarrassed but spiritually weak to mathematics, Blair accepts. Isabel arrives, sees him standing there, and instantly demands an explanation, like she just walked into a crime scene. Brittany casually explains that Blair will now be living with her. Isabel's brain overheats. In her mind, this pervert has unlocked premium access. Brittany scolds her, saying Blair is not that kind of person. Isabel insists she is only worried. Blair stands there, realizing he now has a permanent pervert reputation he did not apply for. Later, Brittany reminds him to wear formal clothes for the exchange seminar. Blair sincerely asks if he can wear his magical worker's uniform. She waves goodbye and tells him to please act normal. That night, they arrive at the Howard family mansion, which is so large it looks like it pays taxes. Brittany explains the Howards are respected across all kingdoms for their mathematics, and Blair quietly connects the dots. Howard, Faye, Vice President, political problem detected. Vice President Calvin greets them, looking important and expensive. Brittany goes to speak with important guests, leaving Blair and Isabel alone inside. The moment Blair sees the food table, his priorities shift. He attacks the first dish immediately, like a man who has suffered academically. Isabel grabs him and asks if he is a pig, reminding him they were not invited to eat. She drags him away before he embarrasses the Academy internationally. While recovering from food restriction, Blair notices a giant painting with a strange design in the middle. Isabel explains proudly that it represents the 7 points of the royal capital, a symbol the Howard family loves deeply. Blair calmly asks what those 7 points are. Unfortunately, Faye appears at that exact moment, clearly summoned by ego. He mocks Blair for not knowing and threatens to question the guards for letting someone low-level enter. Isabel sharply tells Faye to watch his words, but he continues, saying Blair does not even deserve to eat the food. Isabel grabs Blair's hand and tells him to ignore the insults. Faye's internal system crashes. In his mind, Isabel is his, and no one else should be holding her hand. To provoke him, Faye asks if Blair plans to hide behind a woman. Instead of reacting emotionally, Blair calmly asks Faye to explain the 7 points of the capital. Isabel tries to stop him from escalating the situation, but Blair is no longer focused on pride, insults, or politics. He is focused on the painting. Smiling like he just arranged entertainment for the evening, Faye asks Blair whether he truly believes he is a math genius. Isabel immediately protests this behavior, but Faye calmly says he only wants to hear Blair's new mathematical ideas. Then, because subtlety is not part of his personality, he raises his voice and announces to the entire hall that Blair is about to solve the 7 points of the capital. Silence spreads like spilled wine. Isabel freezes. The nobles begin whispering. After all, most of them believe Britney solved the Ross mystery and that Blair simply forced his name onto it. Britney notices the commotion and steps in, instantly aware that this is not a friendly discussion. Faye politely reminds Blair not to disappoint the nobles. Suddenly, Britney grabs Blair's hand, asking what exactly is happening because the Howard family is the most powerful in Apollo City and making them angry is professionally unhealthy. She explains quickly that the 7 points problem is impossible to solve and Faye knows this very well, which is exactly why he threw it at Blair. Faye lifts his glass casually and asks if the great mathematician lacks confidence. Britney is visibly furious and looks ready to declare war, but Blair calmly stops her and says he will attempt to solve it as a small thank you to his senior for expelling him from the library. Both women stare at him. When Blair says he will do something, he usually does. Turning to Faye, he repeats that he will solve the 7 points. Faye explains the legend dramatically. Hundreds of years ago, when the city was smaller and divided by a river, the first patriarch built 7 bridges connecting both sides. He claimed there was a path where one could cross each bridge exactly once and return to the starting point without repeating any path. Many mathematicians tried to solve it. None succeeded. The patriarch himself solved it, but before publishing the answer, he was mysteriously found dead in the river. The solution vanished with him. Since then, generations have failed. The Howard family celebrates this as their sacred glory. Faye finishes his story expecting intimidation to land. Blair listens quietly. Not much time passes before his expression changes slightly. Faye smirks and asks whether the genius has found the solution already. Blair calmly replies that he does not know. Faye bursts into laughter and loudly asks where all that confidence disappeared. Some nobles nod and whisper that perhaps the rumors were exaggerated. A few even say Blair is just trash who got lucky. The atmosphere shifts. But then, among the nobles, a distinguished woman narrows her eyes and says perhaps it is not that simple. Blair stares at the painting and calmly begins thinking. But the more he thinks, the more something becomes obvious. There is no solution. In his past life, there was a similar problem, and it ended exactly the same way impossible. The entire hall watches him as if he is about to either become a legend or a joke. Brittany and Isabel stand there confused. Faye loudly claims Blair is only saying this because he does not know the answer, reminding everyone that the first patriarch solved it. Blair calmly asks if there is any actual evidence of that solution. Faye immediately loses composure, demanding how a common student dares to question the sages of his family. At that moment, a firm voice interrupts. Viscount Howard himself steps forward and tells Faye to stop using past achievements to show off. Faye trembles and apologizes instantly to his father. The Viscount says he has heard much about Blair from Calvin. Blair bows respectfully. The Viscount apologizes for the earlier conflict, but then firmly states that the 7 points absolutely have a solution. Blair responds calmly that he never accused them of lying. He simply states that the problem has no solution. Isabel quietly notes that it is the first time she has seen Blair this serious. The Viscount's expression hardens, like father, like son. Against all odds, he claims he has evidence. He grabs paper and pen and begins drawing quickly, explaining that each piece of land is a point. If you can connect all points without crossing lines and without lifting the pen, it represents crossing each bridge exactly once. Four eyes widen. The Viscount's wife whispers that this is wonderful. A blonde noblewoman proudly says her friend was right. The boy truly has a remarkable brain. Blair continues, explaining that bridges can only start or end at certain points. If a point has an even number of connections, it is balanced. Brittany follows his reasoning and adds that if all points have even numbers, the path is possible. The room leans in closer. Blair nods and says she is correct, but then calmly finishes the thought. Here, the number of connections does not allow that. It is mathematically impossible to cross all 7 bridges and return to the start without repeating one. Silence falls like a dropped glass. Hundreds of years of family pride quietly collapse under simple logic. The onlookers stand speechless, watching a boy politely dismantle a legend. Blair calmly finishes his explanation and adds that it is a 100% impeccable argument, which unfortunately is the worst possible thing Faye could hear. Faye immediately declares the entire thing nonsense and shouts that his family is being mocked by noble gossip, ordering everyone not to believe Blair. Sadly for him, yelling does not improve mathematics. The nobles begin looking at him the same way one looks at someone arguing with gravity. One woman whispers that if Blair is right, the Howard patriarch may have deceived scholars for centuries. Faye's mind collapses on the spot. He turns desperately to his father, silently asking for rescue. The Viscount responds with immediate parenting by punching his son straight in the face. Faye drops to the ground like a poorly solved equation. The Viscount tells him to shut up and calls him a disgrace, but from the corner of his eye he glares at Blair as if this entire intellectual disaster is somehow the boy's fault. Blair, who only answered a question, is understandably confused about the hostility. Still, he calmly reminds the Viscount that he answered Faye's question, and according to house rules, the Viscount should answer one of his. Seeing his son still on the floor, the Viscount reluctantly agrees. Blair asks something simple. What is the length of a square's diagonal? The Viscount smiles immediately. His family is famous for mathematics. This is easy. He confidently answers to asterisk, adding that this is common knowledge. Brittany quietly wonders why Blair would ask such an obvious question. Blair closes his eyes, nods politely, and says the answer is wrong. He clarifies that he wants the actual length of the diagonal. The Viscount freezes. The crowd begins whispering. Because here lies the problem. In this world, everyone believes only in whole numbers. The powerful school of numbers Demiders, centered in the academy and heavily influenced by the Howard family, teaches that every mystery of the world can be explained through perfect integers. Even Isabel's father, the city's lord, must show respect to their authority. Scholars, nobles, and students alike follow this belief with confidence. In Blair's old world, however, a similar school once existed, the Pythagoreans, who believed numbers were pure and perfect until one unfortunate student, named Hippasus, discovered something horrifying. The believers in perfect whole numbers were horrified when they realized the diagonal could not be expressed cleanly. So, according to legend, they tied the poor mathematician up and threw him into the sea, because clearly drowning the messenger fixes the equation. Of course, truth is stubborn. Generations later, these strange values were named irrational numbers, and human understanding expanded whether anyone liked it or not. Now, standing in the Howard mansion, Blair calmly brings that same nightmare back to life. Judging by the Viscount's sweating face, he absolutely knows about irrational numbers, but admitting it publicly would mean admitting their sacred foundation was incomplete. Nobles whisper, scholars frown. Britney mutters in disbelief because even she cannot produce a clean whole number for the diagonal. Blair gently explains that it is a number discovered long ago, perhaps buried for convenience. Faye watches his father standing there powerless, and for the first time tonight he understands that humiliation is hereditary. Rage takes control. He screams that all of this happened because of Blair and charges at him like violence is a substitute for logic. Blair calmly prepares to dodge, but before impact, someone grabs Faye's arm with terrifying strength. Pure rage in her eyes, Faye demands she let go. She refuses. He struggles and realizes she is stronger than he expected. Behind them, the Viscount trembles not from anger, but from damage control. He asks if Faye understands how much trouble he has caused tonight. Faye says nothing. He just stares at Blair as if plotting future revenge. The Viscount raises his voice, apologizes deeply for the incident, promises to discipline his son, and announces that regarding Blair's diagonal question, he will provide a formal answer in a few days. He thanks everyone for their guidance and tells Blair to enjoy the mansion tonight, because nothing says no hard feelings like forced politeness after intellectual defeat. As he leaves, it is clear he is not satisfied. Being dismantled by a teenager is not good for family pride. Blair thanks the woman who stopped Faye. She smiles and asks if he has forgotten her. Isabel suddenly appears and hits Blair lightly, accusing him of flirting with someone else. Blair looks confused because he has absolutely no idea what just happened. The woman laughs and says she was joking, but admits the closeness between Blair and Isabel is enviable. Isabel tries to respond confidently, but ends up fumbling her words. The woman introduces herself again. Alice and explains that her family represents the city of Yapo and always attends these exchanges. She extends her hand politely. Blair greets her respectfully. Alice leans closer, examining him with interest, and asks if she may discuss mathematics privately with him sometime. Blair refuses instantly, no hesitation. His expression becomes serious and almost alarmed. He repeats his rejection more politely and insists she should speak with Miss Britney instead, since all his ideas were inspired by her. Political crisis avoided. Romantic crisis pending. Alice chuckles softly and calls Blair unpredictable, then gracefully says goodbye, adding that next time they should have a proper chat when there are fewer people around, which is a very polite way of saying without witnesses. The moment she leaves, Isabel begins pouting like a storm cloud and immediately complains that Alice was obviously trying to seduce Blair. Britney simply waves goodbye as if this is normal party behavior. Isabel then turns her frustration toward Blair, scolding him for almost being seduced and accusing him of wanting to follow Alice. Blair defends himself calmly, saying there is absolutely no reason for him to follow her. Isabel insists that boys always get excited when pretty girls approach them. Blair pauses, then smoothly asks whether Alice is as beautiful as Isabel. Isabel freezes, blushes, and nervously asks if he thinks Alice is prettier. Blair answers honestly that Isabel is prettier. This completely disables her ability to argue. She turns red and loses all remaining words. Meanwhile, Blair privately thinks she is being overly persistent, and that he simply told the truth after all. They were discussing faces, not anything else. While Isabel is still trying to recover from this unexpected compliment, someone approaches and greets them politely. It is Vice President Calvin. Britney asks why he came, and Calvin explains that the three of them have become the center of attention tonight, so he had to see the cause of the commotion himself. Blair modestly says the Vice President is exaggerating, and that he merely helped answer a question after being asked. Calvin replies that there was nothing simple about what Blair did. Solving the Seven Bridges problem undermines the greatest pride of the Howard family, and the strange number Blair mentioned could also shake the entire school of numbers because it directly challenges their foundation. In other words, Blair casually threatened an entire academic system before dessert. Calvin narrows his eyes and asks who Blair really is, since talent like that does not suddenly appear for no reason. The question surprises everyone. Blair calmly brushes it aside, explaining that Faye asked the question first and he simply shared an idea. The number he mentioned was only curiosity, and the Viscount already said he would provide the answer later. Calvin studies him for a moment, then decides to accept the explanation and assures him that the Mathematical Society always stands on the side of truth. Just as Blair begins feeling relieved, Calvin quietly warns him to be careful of the Howards. They are not easy people to offend. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the mansion, the Viscount sits calmly on a sofa while Faye lies on the floor nearby, bruised and shaking, clearly having received a very educational lesson about embarrassing the family in public. An ominous man steps forward and informs the Viscount that everything is ready and the plan can be executed at any time. The Viscount orders him to wait until Blair leaves the mansion and then make his death look like an accident. Apparently, the Howard family has experience with accidents. The man bows and prepares to leave, but suddenly a voice interrupts and calmly calls the Viscount father. Everyone turns. Standing behind them is a mysterious man dressed in white whom no one noticed entering. The Viscount recognizes him instantly, Abel, his son, and asks the very reasonable question of why he is still alive. The assassin also looks shocked, insisting he personally made sure Abel was dead. Abel ignores him and calmly says it is understandable his father thought he was dead, since the Viscount himself gave the order to kill him, just like the order he gave tonight for Blair. The Viscount explodes with rage and accuses Abel of conspiring with Blair, but Abel simply criticizes him for still being cruel to his own blood. Furious, the Viscount pulls out a flintlock pistol and threatens to shoot him unless he explains his true purpose. By now, Faye is regaining consciousness just in time to watch the family drama escalate. Abel sighs and says his father always asks too many questions, but he will explain. The boy named Blair has no connection to him whatsoever, but his appearance provided the perfect opportunity for Abel to finally return to the family. The reason he returned is simple. He intends to change the entire Howard family from the ground up. The Viscount is stunned and asks if he truly believes he can change the family. Abel asks what the family's cornerstone is. The Viscount proudly answers, honor. Abel immediately calls it a lie. Irritated, the Viscount demands an explanation. Abel calmly exposes the truth. The Viscount already knew the Seven Bridges problem had no solution, and that the number Blair mentioned cannot be expressed within their system. Yet he hid the truth to preserve the family's reputation and the authority of the School of Numbers. Worse still, anyone who tried to reveal the truth mysteriously disappeared, including Abel himself. At this point, the Viscount completely snaps and declares he will kill Abel again for the sake of the family. Abel calmly reminds him that truth cannot be buried forever. Sooner or later, it surfaces. Tonight, Blair shattered their illusion in front of the entire mathematical community. Abel then asks a simple question: can the Viscount kill everyone who now knows the truth? Before anyone reacts, Abel grabs the pistol from his father and presses it against his own chest, mocking him. If the truth spreads tomorrow, the Howard family will collapse anyway. The Viscount's hand trembles. For the first time tonight, the powerful patriarch looks defeated. Slowly, he releases the gun. Desperate now, he asks Abel what they can possibly do to prevent the family's downfall. Abel gives the only answer he came here to deliver. He will replace his father as patriarch and rebuild the Howard family so that it can survive the truth. The Viscount breaks into a cold sweat. Apparently, the proposal is terrifying enough to make even a proud patriarch reconsider his life choices. A few days later, life looks very different at Britney's house. Blair wakes up to an alarm clock screaming beside his bed, like it personally hates him. But he cannot complain because for the first time in a while, he is sleeping in a clean, soft bed instead of the sad utility room he used to live in. Half asleep, he stumbles out to say good morning to Britney, only to notice something shocking in her study: a mountain of papers covering the desk. It looks like a paper avalanche. Blair immediately realizes Britney stayed up all night trying to calculate the mysterious number again. Ever since the exchange meeting, the entire academic world has been in chaos. The Howard family's reputation is under question after the Seven Bridges argument, and the strange number Blair mentioned, one that cannot be expressed with rational numbers, has become infamous. Some scholars even call it the devil's number, which Blair privately finds dramatic for something that is just basic mathematics from his old world. Of course, none of them can express it properly yet, because irrational numbers are completely unknown territory here. Still, Blair respects their effort. Eventually, they will discover it, just like people did in his previous world. As he stands there thinking about the future, a dove flies past the window like the universe is dramatically announcing a new chapter in his life. While browsing the pile of papers, he spots a newspaper headline that makes him pause. The Howard family has replaced their patriarch, and the new patriarch has officially dissolved the School of Numbers. Blair thinks that abandoning the school is honestly the smartest move they could make, though he wonders what kind of internal earthquake made them change their minds so quickly. While he imagines what the new patriarch might be like, Britney suddenly appears behind him wearing very light morning clothes, rubbing her eyes and still half asleep. She greets him casually. Blair returns the greeting while trying very hard to behave like a respectable human being and not stare, which is difficult because she clearly did not realize how lightly dressed she is. Britney then scolds him for not waking her up like she asked the night before. Blair admits he forgot, which is technically true, but also suspiciously convenient. Britney teasingly calls him a bad boy and says she knows he did not really forget, and that she also knows he probably already figured out the mysterious number. She leans closer while joking about him teasing her with secrets, and Blair's brain officially stops working. A second later, his nose starts bleeding. Britney notices immediately, follows the direction of his eyes, realizes what she is wearing, freezes in pure embarrassment, and then slaps Blair across the face while calling him a pervert. After the extremely educational slap incident, the two retreat to the kitchen so Blair can make breakfast while still wearing Britney's handprint on his cheek like a souvenir. Britney feels a little guilty and apologizes, explaining that the slap was just a subconscious reaction. Blair casually points out that she seems to have a completely different personality right after waking up, which embarrasses her slightly, so she nervously asks if she is annoying in the mornings. Blair answers with total calm that he does not mind at all, and that he does not dislike her either way. That single sentence immediately makes Britney blush. Meanwhile, Blair feels very proud of himself for successfully surviving the situation like a diplomatic professional. As he cooks, Britney watches curiously and asks why he is mixing those red fruits with the eggs. Blair tells her he is making scrambled eggs. She looks confused because that dish simply does not exist in this world yet. When he finishes, the plate looks surprisingly delicious. Blair explains that the red fruits are called tomatoes, and that in his hometown everyone loves tomato scrambled eggs. For a moment, he even remembers making the same dish in his previous life. After placing the plate on the table, Blair tells her to try it later because he has to leave for class. Just as he is about to go, Britney stops him and wipes a stain off his shirt with a cloth. Blair freezes instantly because she suddenly got very close, and his brain stops functioning again. She finishes cleaning the shirt until it is perfectly neat and reminds him to be careful on his way to school. After he leaves, Britney sits alone at the table staring suspiciously at the strange-looking eggs. She wonders if this weird dish is even edible. Eventually, curiosity wins. She takes a bite. The moment the flavor hits her, she freezes. The aroma of the eggs and the sweet freshness of the tomatoes explode in her mouth, making her curl her toes in pure delight. She shivers slightly while enjoying the taste, realizing that this simple dish is unbelievably good. Meanwhile, at school, Blair's stomach is loudly protesting because he rushed out without eating his own breakfast. In class, several girls are gossiping excitedly about the new head of the Howard family, praising how handsome he is, while also discussing the mysterious person who solved the Seven Bridges problem and introduced the so-called devil's number before disappearing from the scene like some kind of mathematical ghost. One of the girls in class says she heard from her uncle that the mysterious genius who solved the Seven Bridges problem is actually the same age as them and asks to remain anonymous. The blonde girl gasps and says she cannot believe the person who shook the entire mathematics community is just their age. She had imagined some ancient scholar with a beard down to his knees. Meanwhile, in the background, Isabel leans toward Blair and asks him again if he truly does not know how to express the devil's number. Blair answers casually that he does not know everything and that he already told them everything he knows. Isabel slams her hand on the desk and accuses him of lying again. Before she can continue the interrogation, a cheerful voice interrupts and tells her not to trouble Blair so early in the morning. It is Alice, who has just walked into the classroom like she owns the place. She greets them warmly and then casually blows a flying kiss to Blair. Blair nearly stops breathing. Isabel immediately asks why Alice is here since she is a third-year student, while Blair politely returns her greeting. The rest of the boys in the room look at Blair with deep jealousy, because somehow the two most beautiful girls in the academy are both talking to him. One freckled boy wonders how this idiot suddenly became so lucky. Jasmine also notices the scene and glances over curiously. Alice leans closer to Blair and asks sweetly about the devil's number, which makes him nervous because she is now standing way too close. At that exact moment, his stomach growls loudly, echoing across the classroom. Blair apologizes awkwardly while everyone stares at him. Alice smiles softly at his embarrassment, while Isabel immediately calls him a pig for being hungry this early. Alice then produces a piece of delicious-looking bread and offers it to him, saying she accidentally brought extra lunch and asking him to help her eat it. Blair's mouth begins watering instantly. After a short internal battle with dignity, he accepts the bread and thanks Alice, calling her a good friend. Isabel immediately grabs his cheek and stops him from eating it, scolding him for accepting food from strangers. Blair argues that he tried to refuse, but the bread looks too good to ignore. Isabel gets even angrier and says he should have asked her for food first. Blair points out that she literally just called him a pig a minute ago if he asked for food. Isabel loudly declares she does not care. Alice calmly interrupts and says it is natural for her to help him, since he is a once-in-a-lifetime genius. Isabel becomes even more irritated and suddenly produces her own bread, insisting Blair should eat hers instead and return Alice's. Blair is completely confused by this sudden generosity. Alice teasingly points out that Isabel is acting jealous even though they are not in that kind of relationship. Isabel's irritation level rises to critical and she demands Blair choose between her bread or Alice's, bread only one. Alice smiles sweetly and says he should simply choose what he likes. The two girls glare at each other, while Blair sits in the middle of the battlefields just trying to eat breakfast in peace. Desperate to stop the conflict, Blair takes Isabel's bread. Isabel celebrates triumphantly, declaring that her bread is obviously better than Alice's. Alice narrows her eyes slightly, but before anyone can continue arguing, Blair suddenly stuffs both breads into his mouth at once. The classroom freezes. Blair struggles heroically to chew and swallow while sweating like he just ran a marathon. After a painful few seconds, he manages to swallow everything and praises both breads with tears streaming down his face. His classmates stare in concern, wondering if he nearly died just now. Isabel becomes delighted, convinced he devoured her bread because it was so delicious. Meanwhile, Alice gently wipes a crumb from Blair's face, then slowly eats it herself while looking straight at him, licking her finger afterward and softly scolding him for being careless. Isabel immediately ignites with pure rage as she watches Alice flirt shamelessly with Blair right in front of her. Suddenly, the bell rings, saving Blair from the bread battlefield. Alice realizes it is time for class and cheerfully waves goodbye to Blair. Blair waves back unfortunately, with a face that still looks suspiciously like a happy idiot. Isabel notices immediately. She points at him like a prosecutor delivering a verdict and declares that she will wait for him after class. Blair has no choice but to agree. Isabel storms out of the room and slams the door with enough force to startle nearby pigeons. The moment both girls are gone, Blair releases a deep sigh of relief, as if he just survived a natural disaster. Unfortunately, that relief lasts 3 seconds. A huge hand suddenly grabs his cheek and squeezes it while calling his name. It is Toby. Toby demands to know when Blair became friends with Alice. Blair calmly explains that he met her the other night. Toby instantly misunderstands this and becomes shocked that Blair was meeting beautiful third-year girls at night. Blair quickly clarifies that he met her at the Mathematics Association conference where Miss Britney took him. Toby suddenly remembers the news about that conference and asks if it was the one where the mysterious devil's number appeared. But Blair quickly interrupts because Britney has just walked into class. Like always, Blair solves the problems on the board effortlessly, while the rest of the class watches in quiet despair. Britney then tells everyone to discuss the question on the board in groups. As the students move around, she quietly hands Blair a piece of bread and whispers that it is for breakfast since he rushed to school without eating. Blair immediately begins sweating because the last thing he wants to see right now is more bread. He reluctantly carries it back to his group. Toby notices it immediately and asks why Blair is holding bread again. Blair pretends not to hear and tries to start the group discussion instead. Suddenly, a pink-haired girl slams her hands on the desk dramatically and asks Blair about the mysterious man from the conference, since Toby told everyone he was there. Blair slowly turns to Toby, who suddenly finds the ceiling very interesting. Blair tries to dodge the question by saying he only sort of saw the person. The girl asks how someone can sort of see a person. Jasmine nearby seems to be quietly thinking about something. Blair explains that he was absent when the mysterious man stood up, and when he returned the hall was already in chaos, so he could not find him. The girl asks why he left the hall at such an important moment. Blair answers with perfect confidence that he had diarrhea from eating too much. The entire group falls silent. Toby casually picks his nose and complains that Blair wasted a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The pink-haired girl scolds Toby, saying Blair was already lucky just to attend, since only nobles or rich families can enter those conferences. She then enthusiastically invites Blair to her house to tutor her in mathematics, and mentions that if he gets tired, he can rest in their very large mansion. Toby narrows his eyes and asks whether she really just wants math tutoring. She becomes furious and insists she is simply very studious. Meanwhile, Jasmine watches the entire scene looking increasingly irritated for mysterious reasons. Eventually, time passes and the bell rings again, signaling the end of class. Blair lets out another sigh of relief after successfully avoiding Isabel all day. Deciding to use the free time wisely, he heads outside to practice magic. Just as he prepares to begin, a voice suddenly calls out and asks when he became so interested in magic practice. Blair turns around and sees a hooded figure standing nearby. Before he can ask anything, the figure suddenly lunges forward, a knife flashing straight toward him. Blair barely has time to react before the knife stops right at his neck. Staying surprisingly calm for someone who is 1 inch away from becoming a cautionary tale, he asks the mysterious attacker who they are. The hooded figure slowly reveals herself a blue-haired girl hiding under a hoodie. It is Jasmine. She warns him not to move because the dagger is very sharp. Blair raises an eyebrow and asks what exactly inspired her to start threatening classmates with cutlery, but she cuts him off and accuses him directly. He is the one who solved the 7 bridges problem and introduced the devil's number. So how did someone who used to be mediocre suddenly become a genius in both math and magic? Jasmine grows more agitated and declares that he must be impersonating the real Blair. Blair sighs and tells her she has asked so many questions that he does not even know where to begin. He introduces himself again, carefully avoiding mentioning that he came from another world. Jasmine suddenly grabs his cheeks and starts pulling them, convinced he must be wearing some kind of magical disguise. She confidently declares that her technique can reveal any disguise only to discover his face is painfully real. Blair retaliates by kicking her foot, causing her to lose balance. Jasmine panics as she begins falling backward, bracing for impact, but the fall never comes. Blair catches her at the last moment. For a brief second, they are extremely close, which makes Jasmine blush while Blair remains awkwardly expressionless. She quickly snaps back to reality and demands he let go. Blair does so, but calmly reminds her not to point the spoon. Yes, the spoon she stole earlier and pretended was a dagger at his neck again. He firmly states that he really is Blair. Jasmine is still flustered, but presses him again about how he suddenly became so talented and why he talks differently from the Blair she used to know. Blair finally answers honestly in the strangest way possible. He really is Blair, just not the same one. After a long dream, he woke up different. He carefully explains that in his original world, there was no magic at all. Instead, People relied on science and technology so advanced that it could perform tasks even magic might struggle with. In that world, people built machines that could fly through the sky, communicate across continents, and even travel beyond their planet to explore the stars. Blair explains that he himself was not some great hero there, just an ordinary mathematics teacher. But the knowledge of that world, especially its mathematics, is the reason he knows things that no one in this world has ever studied before. Blair remembers something from his old life while explaining everything to Jasmine. Back when he was just a math teacher, a student who looked a lot like Jasmine once raised her hand in class and asked a curious question. Could people really travel through the starry sky? And were there other planets beyond the stars? Blair answered honestly that yes, people could travel through space, and there were countless planets in the universe. Unfortunately, instead of being amazed, the students laughed and mocked him for sounding like a strange, boring teacher. The embarrassment was so bad that he did not even know what to say next. As he finishes recalling that memory, the sun outside the academy building is already setting and the light through the windows fades, signaling that night is coming. Blair apologizes to Jasmine for cutting his story short and explains that after that long dream, he simply woke up here with his current knowledge of mathematics and magic, though he seems to have lost some of his memories. Jasmine suddenly looks worried for him. Since Blair finished explaining, it should be her turn to speak, but she has nothing left to question. Instead, she says she now believes that he really is Blair, especially because the things he said earlier sound exactly like the strange ideas the old Blair used to talk about. Blair asks if he really said things like that before. Jasmine confirms it and explains that the old Blair was always more interested in science than magic, and even wished to live in a world without magic because he lacked talent for it. Convinced he must have some kind of amnesia, Jasmine promises to help him recover his memories. Blair simply plays along and thanks her sincerely while shaking her hand, which makes Jasmine suddenly panic and become flustered as she loudly promises again that she will help him regain his memories. Later, back inside the academy, Blair is walking through the hallway thinking deeply, when someone suddenly grabs him from behind and lifts him slightly off the ground. It is Toby, who starts wrestling with him like an excited dog. While they argue, Blair notices a man quietly watching them from a distance. He asks the stranger to introduce himself and manages to escape Toby's grip. Toby immediately recognizes the man and asks suspiciously what he is planning this time. The man is Senior Faye. Unexpectedly, Faye bows his head and apologizes for what happened at the mansion earlier, asking Blair to forgive his mistakes. Other students gather around in confusion, wondering what is happening. Blair himself looks puzzled and asks what exactly he is supposed to forgive, because he honestly does not remember. The crowd begins whispering. Faye then hands him a letter and explains that his older brother, the new patriarch of the Howard family, sent an invitation. Tonight there will be a meeting for the entire kingdom's mathematical community, where the new patriarch will explain everything. While bowing, Faye hides his frustration carefully and urges Blair to attend. Toby immediately warns Blair not to go, suspecting another trap. Blair thinks about it for a moment while reading the invitation, but in the end, curiosity wins, and he decides to go to the mansion anyway. Later that night, the meeting hall of the Howard mansion is filled with wealthy scholars and nobles, all gathered in groups while discussing the shocking events that recently shook the mathematical world. Blair arrives at the Howard mansion and immediately feels small next to the enormous building, but curiosity wins and he decides to go inside anyway. Suddenly, someone pinches his ear so hard that he nearly yelps. Turning around, he finds Isabel standing there with the expression of someone who has been waiting specifically to punish him. She scolds him for not waiting for her after class like she told him. Before Blair can defend himself, Britney also arrives and looks surprised that he actually came. Dressed elegantly and looking dangerously attractive as usual, she tells him that she and Isabel had been looking for him at the academy earlier. Blair asks if she also received an invitation. Britney explains that once news spread that the Howard family would hold a meeting tonight, nearly the entire mathematical community rushed over. But interestingly, no one else received a personal invitation like Blair did. That only makes Blair more suspicious about what the meeting is really about. Before he can think further, someone suddenly grabs his ear again and starts rubbing it. Blair's face turns red instantly. It is Alice. She casually plays with his ear while smiling, which makes Isabel's mood drop several degrees colder. Isabel glares at Alice and accuses her of pretending to pull gently, even though Blair's ear is clearly red. Alice simply replies that if it turned red, it must have hurt. Blair immediately senses another battlefield forming and mentally prepares for disaster. Luckily, Britney interrupts before the girls start a war and tells them all to enter the hall for the briefing. Even while walking inside, Isabel and Alice continue glaring at each other like rival generals. As they move through the mansion, Blair suddenly notices something strange. The famous Seven Bridges painting is gone, leaving only an empty frame hanging on the wall. Britney looks at the empty frame thoughtfully and wonders what exactly Abel did to resolve the situation. Blair asks if she knows Abel since she mentioned his name earlier. Britney says they were not particularly close, but they used to be classmates. Abel had once planned to become a teacher at the academy, but mysteriously disappeared 3 years ago. She was just as surprised as everyone else when he suddenly returned as the new head of the Howard family. Curious, Blair asks what kind of person Abel is. Britney thinks for a moment and says that Abel was the type of person who only had mathematics in his eyes. Meanwhile, in a quiet room inside the mansion, Abel sits calmly at his desk reviewing documents. Faye enters and informs him that everyone has arrived and the entire mathematical community is waiting for him in the hall. Abel casually replies that Faye clearly has never been in love, because arriving late to a meeting only increases people's expectations. He then asks if the person Faye mentioned earlier, Blair, has arrived. Faye nervously admits that there were too many people for him to be certain. Abel places a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder and tells him he is not like their father anymore, so Faye does not need to be afraid. Then Abel calmly announces that it is time for them to go to the hall and begin a new chapter for the Howard family. Inside the Howard Mansion's main hall, the venue is packed with scholars, nobles, and mathematicians, all chatting nervously while waiting for the long-anticipated explanation. Suddenly, someone notices movement at the entrance and loudly announces that the Howard brothers have arrived, causing the entire room to turn at once. Abel walks in first, calm and composed like a man strolling through a garden rather than facing a room full of judgmental intellectuals. Behind him, Faye follows with noticeably less confidence, trying to look dignified while also looking like someone who remembers being punched earlier. The crowd quickly notices something surprising. The new patriarch is very young. Abel greets the guests politely and thanks them for attending the briefing. He introduces himself formally as Abel Howard and bows respectfully to the entire audience. Britney quietly observes that Abel is completely different from the person she knew 3 years ago. His clothing, his speech, even his presence have changed. Abel then pulls a small book from his coat and says he will not waste anyone's time. Before addressing the present situation, he must first reveal the truth about his family's past. Blair notices the book and wonders what exactly it contains. Abel explains that the book is a note written by the first patriarch of the Howard family, a note that records a truth their family has hidden for centuries. According to the note, the first patriarch tried tirelessly to solve the Seven Bridges problem by physically walking across the bridges just like other scholars of his era. For a long time, he found no solution, but one day he believed he had successfully crossed all 7 bridges without repeating a path. Excited by this discovery, he proudly announced his success to the public and promised to demonstrate the route the next morning. Unfortunately, that night, when he returned to the bridges to confirm his findings, he discovered the terrible truth: he had made a mistake. He had simply misremembered the route he took. There was no solution. Realizing that he had publicly declared a false discovery, the patriarch believed he would become a laughingstock the next day. Overwhelmed with shame, he took his own life. Before dying, however, he wrote a detailed note explaining the mistake and begged his descendants to reveal the truth to the public. Instead, the family did the opposite. They hid the note and spread the story that the patriarch accidentally fell into the water, allowing the myth of the solved 7 bridges problem to become the foundation of the Howard family's prestige. Abel closes the book and stands firmly before the stunned audience. He declares that the truth cannot remain buried forever, and that the Howard family will now face the consequences of their actions. He bows deeply and asks everyone for forgiveness on behalf of his entire family. Faye looks shocked at his brother's courage and almost tries to stop him, but hesitates. Abel continues standing before the crowd, openly accepting the backlash that will surely follow. The hall erupts in shocked whispers after Abel's revelation. Scholars, nobles, and mathematicians begin murmuring among themselves while trying to process the fact that the Howard family just publicly admitted a lie that lasted for centuries. Watching from the crowd, Blair studies Abel's decision and realizes something important. The new patriarch is extremely decisive. By revealing the truth, Abel not only preserved the honor of the first patriarch, but also accepted the heavy responsibility that future generations of the family will now have to bear. A lady wearing a tall hat raises her voice and asks Abel whether dissolving the school of numbers a few days earlier was meant as atonement for the family's deception. Abel calmly confirms that it was partly an act of repentance, but there was another, more important reason: the mysterious devil's number. The lady asks if the Howard family still failed to calculate it. Abel replies that they have not found the number yet, but not because of any lack of ability. Instead, he announces something shocking: the devil's number does not exist. Blair is stunned by the statement. The audience quickly demands clarification. Abel explains that the number does not exist within their current mathematical system, which is exactly why the School of Numbers had to be disbanded. A nervous young scholar in the crowd asks if that means the devil's number is impossible to understand. Abel shakes his head and says the opposite: it is not unsolvable at all. It simply belongs to a completely new field of mathematics that their community has never explored before. Therefore, the most logical step is to ask the person who proposed the number in the first place. Blair from St. Donna's Academy. The crowd instantly begins whispering again, wondering who this mysterious Blair really is. Abel continues, explaining that Blair originally asked them to keep his identity secret because he is humble about his discoveries. However, Abel insists that the mathematical community now needs Blair to step forward and guide them toward this new knowledge. Britney quickly turns around to ask Blair what he plans to do, but he is gone, completely vanished from the hall without anyone noticing. Faye informs his older brother that Blair does not seem to be anywhere in the venue. Abel simply smiles and says he assumed Blair would eventually reveal himself out of curiosity, but even if he did not appear tonight, Blair will come to him sooner or later. His confidence leaves Faye slightly unsettled. Later, back at school, the academy is buzzing with rumors. The girls in Blair's class are gossiping excitedly about the mysterious genius who introduced the devil's number only to discover that the person in question is actually Blair himself. Now scholars across the kingdom want him to explain it. Blair sits there quietly suffering, realizing that Abel skillfully redirected the entire spotlight away from the Howard family and straight onto him. Suddenly, Toby pokes him in the side and calls his name. Blair panics and immediately blurts out that he does not know anything, even though Toby has not even asked a question yet. Toby simply points forward. Blair slowly looks up and freezes. Standing in front of them like a giant wall is their history teacher, Professor Hank. Blair instantly realizes he has not been paying attention in class at all. Hank calmly says he knows Blair is talented in mathematics, but asks whether Blair has some personal grudge against history since he fails every test. Blair nervously excuses himself by saying his memory of the subject is still a little hazy. Hank suddenly slams his palm onto the desk, making Blair jump in his seat. The professor then scolds him loudly, declaring that even if Blair has become famous overnight, he still needs to focus on his studies because being a mathematical genius does not excuse failing history class. During class, Toby suddenly raises his hand nervously and tells the teacher that someone is looking for Blair. Professor Hank immediately explodes, shouting at Toby for interrupting his lesson. Toby keeps pointing toward the door anyway, trying to explain that the person looking for Blair seems important. Hank stubbornly declares that no one is allowed to interrupt his class, not even Vice President Calvin. Right at that moment, a hand lands on Hank's shoulder from behind. Calvin calmly says that he is, in fact, the one looking for Blair. The teacher nearly jumps out of his skin. After awkwardly trying to defend his earlier statement for a second, Hank quickly changes his tone and allows Blair to leave the classroom. Once they step into the hallway, another man dressed similarly to Calvin joins them. Calvin greets Blair with a warm smile, but Blair immediately looks defeated because he already knows exactly why they came the devil's number. Calvin explains that the entire academic world is waiting for Blair to step forward and solve the mystery, and the pressure on the mathematical society has become unbearable. So they had no choice but to seek his help. Blair thinks for a moment before answering, but the man beside Calvin interrupts and says they truly need his help and that cooperating would not harm him at all. Blair responds with a bright, polite smile, while bluntly saying that he really does not want to help. Meanwhile, Toby rushes across the academy and bursts into Britney's office. Startled, Britney asks why he is in such a panic. Toby, barely catching his breath, blurts out that Blair has suddenly been taken away, which immediately makes her worried. At the same time, Blair finds himself inside a meeting room surrounded by an intimidating group of people. Several scholars and officials from the mathematical community are waiting inside, including the 4 associate deans of the academy and the 3 vice presidents of the mathematical society. Blair also notices that more than a dozen association deacons are waiting outside the door. The pressure is overwhelming. Blair calmly points out that Vice President Calvin clearly planned this situation to pressure him into explaining the devil's number. Calvin admits that since Blair introduced such a troubling problem to the world, it has become his responsibility to clarify it. Blair asks them why they insist on calling the truth devilish. The deans look irritated by his comment, but Calvin stops them from arguing. Instead, he asks Blair directly whether the devil's number truly cannot be expressed as a ratio of whole numbers. Blair answers that not only the devil's number, but also numbers like square root of 2, square root of 3, and square root of 5 cannot be expressed as ratios of integers. In fact, there are infinitely many such numbers. The scholars are stunned. Blair explains calmly that mathematics evolves constantly, and it is normal for older theories to be incomplete. As long as new proofs are discovered, the system of numbers expands. Realizing that Blair truly understands the truth behind the mysterious number, Calvin finally drops his authority and sincerely asks for Blair's help in guiding the mathematical community forward. Blair politely refuses and apologizes, explaining that he truly cannot help them solve the problem. He calmly tells the scholars that he understands what they are really afraid of, the possibility that the truths they believed for generations might be overturned. Blair explains that fear is natural. In his hometown, countless generations also challenged old beliefs in their pursuit of truth and knowledge. It was exactly that fear of the unknown that pushed people to explore further and understand more. Because of that, Blair says the mathematical community should not run from this discovery, but instead face it with courage, just as their ancestors once did. In the end, he reminds them that the history of humanity is also a history of courage. His words leave the vice president and the scholars silent for a moment. Impressed and slightly humbled, they suddenly bow their heads to him, which startles Blair. Calvin admits that Blair is right and apologizes for their earlier behavior. He thanks Blair for his guidance and promises that the mathematical community will remember his contribution. Blair awkwardly tries to reassure them that it was nothing, but suddenly the door to the room flies open with incredible force. One unlucky scholar is knocked over by the door and a chair gets pushed aside in the chaos. Everyone turns to see what happened. Standing at the doorway is Britney, radiating terrifying magical energy. 2 small whirlwinds swirl in her hands as she glares into the room. In a frightening tone, she demands to know what they have done to Blair, clearly ready to attack if necessary. Blair quickly raises his hands and calls out to her, explaining that he is fine and that they were only having a conversation. Britney freezes for a moment, realizing the misunderstanding. Embarrassed, she apologizes repeatedly to the scholars. Calvin calmly tells her that he understands after all. Blair is her prize student, and it was partly their fault for taking him away so suddenly. Britney awkwardly accepts the explanation. Later, while walking through the hallway on their way home, Britney admits that she rushed over because Toby told her Blair had been taken away, and she feared he might be in danger. Blair reassures her that no one would dare harm him inside the academy with so many witnesses around. Britney then hesitates before asking him something she has been curious about. She wants to know why he introduced the devil's number and caused such chaos in the mathematical world. Blair pretends innocence, saying he was simply following the tradition of mathematics asking questions and never expected the question to create such a problem. His explanation, however, does not satisfy Britney. She then awkwardly asks something completely different, whether he likes Isabel. Blair is caught completely off guard. Britney, misunderstanding the situation, imagines that Blair confronted Faye earlier because he was jealous about Isabel. She even grabs his shoulders and assures him that she will keep his feelings secret and that she supports him. Blair begins sweating heavily while trying to explain that she misunderstood everything, but Britney quickly escapes back to her office before he can clarify anything. Blair stands there frozen with embarrassment. Later that night at home, Blair cooks another dish from his hometown while thinking that Britney's imagination might be far too powerful and that he really needs to explain the misunderstanding to her properly before things become even more awkward. Just as Blair is finishing another dish from his hometown, someone suddenly appears behind him and asks what he is cooking. Blair turns around in confusion and sees Isabel standing there like she has always lived in the kitchen. Before he can question how she got there, Britney casually explains that she invited Isabel over so she could learn more about the devil's number, and of course, she should also try Blair's cooking. Blair sighs but accepts his fate. While cooking, he asks Isabel if she specializes in wind magic. Isabel proudly explains that Miss Britney is a high-level wind magician, which is why she wants to follow the same path. Blair nods thoughtfully and suddenly announces that he wants to build something called a refrigerator, but he would need help from a senior water magician. Britney tilts her head and asks what that strange thing is. Blair explains that it is basically a box made of ice, used to preserve ingredients so food does not spoil. Curious, Isabel looks at the sketch Blair made for it and immediately bursts into laughter. The blueprint looks like it was drawn by someone who lost a fight with a pencil. She laughs so hard that Blair angrily snatches the paper back from her. Meanwhile, Britney is staring at the drawing very seriously. After a moment, she calls Blair's name and asks if the structure she just formed with her magic looks similar to what he imagined. Her eyes glow purple as she conjures an ice structure shaped like a box. Blair stares in amazement and says it is exactly what he had in mind, asking how she managed it so easily. Britney casually replies that she also knows water magic, so making ice is not difficult. Isabel is shocked because only a few magicians can use more than one element. Blair then asks Britney why she stays teaching at St. Donna's Academy, despite having such powerful magic. Her expression darkens slightly, and her eyes drift toward the cooking pot. Instead of answering, she quickly tells Blair that the food is ready. The distraction works perfectly because Blair rushes to turn off the stove. Soon, the table is filled with delicious dishes from Blair's hometown. Isabel looks suspiciously at the food and says it looks strange even though it smells amazing. Britney laughs and admits she bought the same thing at first, but the food turned out to be incredibly good. Blair explains that these dishes are common in his hometown, which is why Isabel has never seen them before after all. He never invited her to eat them. Isabel stubbornly declares that she will not eat his food even if she starves today. 5 minutes later, she gives up and starts eating. After tasting it, she quietly licks her lips, completely defeated by the flavor. When the meal ends, she looks half-dazed from how good it was. Blair smirks and reminds her that she said she would never touch his food. Isabel immediately grabs his ear and scolds him for making such delicious dishes, while Blair yells in pain. Britney laughs while watching the chaos. Blair asks what is so funny. Britney cheerfully replies that she really thinks the two of them are a good match. Both Blair and Isabel freeze instantly. Isabel turns away and insists she would never match with such a pervert. Blair also turns away and says he would never match with such an arrogant girl. Britney just smiles. Then she changes the topic and announces that Isabel will soon be promoted to junior magician, asking what field she plans to specialize in. Isabel confidently says she wants to specialize in wind magic, just like Britney. Britney nods but explains that while wind magic becomes extremely powerful later on, beginners often lack combat strength. She gently advises Isabel that as a young woman she should also learn a defensive element, and suggests considering earth magic, which is the strongest element for defense among the four. Isabel immediately complains that the earth magic robes are ugly, which in her opinion is a completely valid reason to reject an entire branch of magic. Blair silently makes fun of her in his mind, which somehow still results in her grabbing his ear again. Blair yells in pain and demands to know why she keeps attacking his ears when he has not even said anything. Isabel confidently replies that she knows he was mocking her in his head. Britney then turns to Blair and asks which department of magic he plans to specialize in. Blair thinks for a moment and calmly answers that he wants to study all the departments. Isabel bursts out laughing, telling him to stop dreaming because even Britney could not master every element. However, Britney surprisingly does not laugh. Instead, she studies Blair carefully and says his idea might not be completely impossible. Isabel protests, saying Blair is clearly talking nonsense. But Brittany explains that the magical elements around Blair behave strangely. When she senses his mana, it feels unusually dense and balanced, as if he might have an affinity with all four elements at once. After a moment, she waves the idea aside and says they should focus on training for now. Since Blair helped guide her in mathematics, she will guide him in magic. Both students brighten at her offer. Brittany then explains that magic alone is not enough to become a good magician. Even though the gods granted them magical abilities, spells and gestures take time to perform. In a real fight, a magician might not have that time. That is why many magicians train in martial arts to survive when they cannot cast spells. To demonstrate her control, Brittany casually uses magic to wash all the dishes in the room at once, which impresses Blair with how convenient it looks. She continues explaining that sometimes physical combat skills are even more important than magic, so she intends to teach them fighting first. Blair is shocked to discover that Brittany can also fight. Isabel proudly mentions that she has already learned martial arts at home and asks Brittany to let her spar with Blair so he can understand combat more intuitively. Brittany agrees but reminds Isabel not to hurt him. Isabel promises mercy while secretly deciding she absolutely cannot lose to him. Blair grows slightly nervous as Isabel prepares herself with far too much enthusiasm. Soon they move into the training room. Isabel cracks her knuckles and taunts Blair, telling him not to cry when she beats him. She suddenly dashes forward with impressive speed and throws a punch. Blair calmly sidesteps the attack. Under the dim night light of the training room, the two continue exchanging quick movements across the floor. Isabel attacks repeatedly while Blair dodges smoothly. At one point, Blair grabs her wrists, throwing her balance off, and in a single swift move, he pins her down. Unfortunately, the position ends up being extremely awkward and revealing. Isabel immediately calls him a pervert and demands he let go. Blair calmly says he will release her once she admits defeat, at which point Isabel suddenly tries a surprise kick straight toward his face. The sneak attack fails because Blair dodges it easily, proving that even when someone is yelling pervert, he still refuses to lose focus in a fight. Blair casually releases a burst of wind magic at Isabel, which instantly ruins her heroic stance and turns it into a very unheroic slip. She loses her footing, flails dramatically, and screams like someone who has just discovered gravity for the first time. Fortunately for her dignity and spine, Blair grabs her by the hips and catches her before she hits the ground, freezing them in a suspiciously romantic pose. Naturally, this is exactly when Brittany decides to interrupt and calmly asks Blair where he learned martial arts. Blair, still holding Isabel like misplaced luggage, explains he never studied it formally but practiced Sanda back in his hometown because he liked fighting. This only makes Brittany more curious about this mysterious hometown he keeps mentioning, which puts Blair in immediate danger of needing to invent another lie. Before he can do that, Isabel grabs his ears again and yanks them like she's ringing a doorbell, forcing him to finally let her go. She immediately declares that she only lost because the ground betrayed her and not because Blair did anything impressive. Brittany, however, is far more interested in the fighting style and asks Blair to try it on her. Blair hesitates and warns that Sanda can be hard to control since he almost hit Isabel earlier. But Brittany confidently tells him not to worry. So Blair raises his fists and charges forward only to suddenly notice something distracting bouncing in his field of vision. At that exact moment, he remembers what his Sanda coach once said: when you fight a real master, you won't even realize what happened before you lose. Blair used to think that was exaggerated wisdom. A second later, Brittany taps his neck, and Blair immediately shuts down like someone unplugged his brain. Thankfully, Brittany catches him before he hits the floor and gently sets him down. Isabel panics and asks if Blair is dead, while Brittany calmly explains that he only fainted and will wake up soon. Then Brittany casually drops a bombshell by telling Isabel that she obviously cares about Blair. Isabel nearly explodes, trying to deny liking such a perverted idiot. But Brittany smiles and says there is nothing wrong with liking someone, because she feels the same way. Before Isabel can process that terrifying information, unconscious Blair's hand slowly drifts upward and accidentally grabs Brittany's chest. Isabel's brain instantly short-circuits, and she wonders if Blair was secretly awake the whole time, but he's actually just waking up with absolutely no idea what his hand is doing. The next day, Blair shows up in class wrapped in bandages, like a very unfortunate mummy, and complains that everything hurts. Toby asks what kind of legendary fight happened at Britney's house. Blair hurriedly claims he just fell somewhere, when in reality, Isabel pinned him down and nearly broke his hand after waking up and assuming the grab was intentional. Through the pain, Blair realizes something important. Britney's combat skills are terrifying and far too professional for a normal background, which makes him wonder where she really came from. His thoughts are suddenly interrupted when Toby proudly announces that he has finally mastered Blair's trick of summoning 2 fireballs. Blair is shocked Toby learned it so fast, and Toby eagerly prepares to demonstrate. He gathers flame energy dramatically, finishes the spell, and proudly launches his fireball, while Blair watches with the cautious expression of someone who has learned that magical demonstrations at this academy rarely end without chaos. Toby proudly unleashes his 2 fireball technique, and Blair watches with great anticipation, which quickly turns into deep emotional disappointment when the result is basically too tiny. Birthday candle flames floating in the air like they're afraid of existing. Toby shows them again with great pride, while Blair nods seriously and comforts him by saying his magical power has definitely improved compared to before, carefully hiding the fact that those flames look like they could be defeated by a light breeze. Before the awkward encouragement session can continue, Alice suddenly appears and places a cake in front of Blair because she heard he was injured and assumed he probably forgot to bring lunch again. She politely scares Toby away by pointing out that he clearly already ate, leaving Blair alone with the cake and a suspicious amount of charm in the air. Blair tries to refuse because he feels guilty constantly eating her food, but Alice simply asks if the cake tastes good. Blair, already halfway through a bite, praises her cooking and asks if she herself has eaten, yet only for Alice to completely ignore the question and ask one of her own, does he like Isabel? Blair instantly spits out cake like a malfunctioning fountain and demands to know why she suddenly asked that. Alice calmly guesses that someone else must have asked him the same question earlier and patiently waits for his answer. After wiping cake off his face, Blair gives the safest answer possible. He is only interested in studying magic right now. Alice smiles and says that is a very ruthless answer, but also says that is fine. Blair asks what she means by that, and instead of explaining, she simply kisses him on the cheek and casually leaves, saying she will come play with him again sometime. The entire class witnesses this scene and immediately upgrades Blair's reputation from math genius to legendary senior slayer, since he somehow attracted both Alice and Isabel. The next day, Blair goes to the academy library while still thinking about Alice's mysterious behavior, but he forces himself to focus on studying instead. After finishing nearly every book about the 4 elements on the first floor, he stretches and decides it is finally time to explore the second floor, where the advanced magic books are kept. At the counter, he meets a purple-haired librarian who looks like she hasn't smiled since childhood. Blair politely asks how to access the second floor and hands over his identification. She glances at it and immediately tells him he is only an apprentice magician, which means he needs to become a junior magician to enter the second floor. Blair asks if there is another way, because he cannot pass the certification yet. The woman bluntly tells him that with his current level, he probably wouldn't even understand the books there anyway. Blair is internally offended, but before he can argue, Jasmine suddenly calls his name and steps in to help. After the librarian leaves, Jasmine explains that the rules are simple. Either he becomes a junior magician, or he must pass a special certification by creating a new magic spell. Unfortunately, she also tells him the chances of succeeding at that are extremely low, so the safest path is to increase his mental power and qualify as a junior magician first. Blair immediately agrees to take the certification exam, casually explaining that he just had a new idea for improving water magic, which is the magical equivalent of walking into a physics conference and announcing you fixed gravity. Jasmine quickly warns him that if he fails, the association will blacklist him, meaning no resources, no research access, and probably a lot of annoyed scholars glaring at him forever. But Blair calmly says it will be fine, which is exactly the kind of confidence that makes responsible people nervous. Jasmine is still worried but brings him to the exam room anyway, where the examiners, one bald and permanently irritated, the other wearing blue and permanently skeptical, nearly choke when they hear that an apprentice magician wants to certify an improvement to water magic, something generations of scholars supposedly already perfected. The bald man immediately assumes this is another fraud trying to trick the association, while the man in blue kindly suggests Blair reconsider before ruining his future with a blacklist. Jasmine insists this should at least let him try, so they reluctantly allow it. Blair enters the room, adjusts his mask so it doesn't fall off, and politely introduces himself, which suddenly triggers the bald man's memory. Apparently, Blair is the same troublemaker who broke their testing room last time, so the bald examiner instantly tries to drag the other guy into the safer test room. The man in blue refuses and calls him a coward, confidently telling Blair to cast the spell right here. Blair politely obeys. He gathers energy from the air, drawing it through his body until his eyes glow with a strange mix of ice and fire, then raises both hands and activates two elements at once. The man in blue immediately panics and asks the bald man why he forgot to mention the kid is a dual element caster, while the bald man quietly prepares defensive magic because he clearly remembers how this kind of story ends. Blair then merges the power of ice and fire, producing water and steam simultaneously, which suddenly launches the flames forward like a magical jet engine. The bald examiner's survival instincts kick in as he throws up a defensive spell, just as Blair's attack explodes across the room in a blinding flash, bright enough to make the entire chamber look like a miniature sun, leaving the examiners wondering if they accidentally allowed a research proposal or summoned a disaster. That's it for today's recap. If you enjoyed the story and want part 2, make sure to like the video and comment below. If this video gets a good response, I'll upload the next part very soon.